Please, mister, my mom needs help. I have $5. It's all I have.
Kid, take your money and go home.
But she's sick.
Fine. I'll take care of it.
The black sedan came to a halt on the rain-slicked pavement, its engine a low, predatory growl against the hum of the neon district. Ma Jin-suk stepped out, the sharp lines of his suit and the dark ink of the tattoos on his neck marking him as a man who owned the night. But before he could take a step, a tiny, trembling hand reached out, not with a weapon, but with a single, crumpled $5 bill. He looked down to find a little girl in a simple pink dress standing in the shadows of his towering enforcers. Her hair was damp from the mist, and her eyes were wide with a terror she was trying desperately to hide. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the city noise. "This is everything I have." His men closed in, ready to push her aside, but Jin-suk raised a gloved hand, freezing them in place. In this neighborhood, people paid him in blood or in silence, never in pocket change. He crouched until he was eye level with the girl, his presence cold and imposing. "Why are you here, little one?" Rowena swallowed hard, her small hands shaking as she clutched the money. "I want to hire you," she confessed, her voice cracking. "Because the police are too afraid to help me find my mom." Jin-suk paused, his eyes narrowing as he saw the faint bruise on her arm and the way she scanned the dark alleys behind her. He took the bill, not for the money, but because the confession she was about to make would rattle the soul of a man who thought he'd already seen the worst of this world. The neon lights of the Gangnam district didn't just illuminate the streets. They bled into the puddles, turning the asphalt into a shimmering tapestry of electric blue and poison violet. Ma Jin-suk stood at the center of it all, a silent monolith in a custom-tailored charcoal suit that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. To the tourists, the district was a playground of high-end boutiques and thumping bass, but to those who lived in the shadows, it was a clockwork machine, and Jin-suk was the mainspring. He didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. His authority was written in the way the crowd parted as he walked, a natural bow of the head from a shopkeeper, the sudden silence of a group of rowdy teenagers. On the east side, Jin-suk's word was more than law, it was gravity. He had spent 15 years cultivating a reputation built on two unwavering pillars: absolute reliability and a total lack of mercy for those who broke the rules of the district. The rules were simple. You paid your dues on time. You kept the noise down when the families were sleeping. And most importantly, you never brought heat into the neighborhood. Jin-suk viewed the district as his garden, and he was the gardener tasked with pulling the weeds. He dealt in the business of disappearing problems, whether that meant a bad debt or a rival crew trying to set up shop too close to his borders. He was a man of cold precision, a professional who believed that emotions were the rust that eventually destroyed the machine. As he emerged from the Golden Dragon restaurant that Tuesday evening, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and expensive cologne. His enforcers, two men built like stone walls with eyes that never stopped scanning the perimeter, moved into their choreographed positions. The black sedan hummed at the curb, a dark beast waiting for its master. Everything was as it should be. The cycle of collection and control was in perfect motion. Jin-suk adjusted his cuffs, his gaze lingering for a moment on the tattoos peeking from beneath his collar, reminders of the wars he had fought to reach this peak. He was at the height of his power, a man who thought he had seen every shade of human darkness and controlled every variable. He believed he knew exactly how his night would end: a quiet drive, a glass of expensive whiskey, and the cold satisfaction of a territory well tended. He didn't know that in the shadows of an alley just a few feet away, a 7-year-old girl in a frayed pink dress was holding her breath, waiting to shatter every rule he had ever lived by. The heavy door of the sedan held the night at bay for only a second before the humid air of the district rushed in. Ma Jin-suk stepped onto the pavement, his boots clicking with a finality that usually signaled the end of any conversation. His enforcers moved with him, a seamless wall of muscle and dark fabric that fanned out to create a corridor of absolute privacy. This was the dead zone. the space around the boss where no civilian dared to tread. To enter it without an invitation was more than a mistake. It was a death wish. But as Jin-suk reached for the handle of the car door, the rhythm of the night stuttered. Amidst the low hum of the idling engine and the distant thud of club music, there was a new sound, the frantic, uneven scuff of small sneakers on wet asphalt. It was a sound so out of place in this world of heavy footsteps and armored hearts that it made the lead enforcer's hand drift toward the holster concealed beneath his jacket. "Back off," the guard barked, his voice like grinding gravel. He stepped forward to intercept the intruder, his large frame casting a shadow that swallowed the light. Jin-suk didn't turn at first. He was used to desperate people, but they usually approached with loud pleas or calculated bribes. This was different. This was silent, save for a sharp, hitching breath that sounded like a sob caught in a throat. He felt a small, sudden pressure against his sleeve, a touch so light it was almost a ghost. He froze. His men moved instantly, the circle tightening with lethal efficiency, their expressions hardening into masks of professional violence. But Jin-suk raised a single, gloved finger. The air in the street seemed to solidify. Slowly, he turned his head. Standing there, having slipped through a gap in the human wall that even a professional assassin couldn't find, was a girl who looked like she belonged in a different universe. Her pink dress was stained with grease and rain, and her small face was a map of exhaustion and raw, unfiltered courage. She didn't look at the guns or the hulking men who could have crushed her with a single hand. She looked only at Jin-suk. With a hand that shook so violently it threatened to drop her prize, she reached out. Between her mud-streaked fingers was a single, crumpled $5 bill. It was damp, ruined, and clearly all she had left in the world. The enforcers stood paralyzed, caught between their training and the sheer absurdity of the moment. No one approached Ma Jin-suk with $5. Jin-suk stared at the money, then at the girl. For the first time in 15 years, the dragon of the district felt the cold iron of his composure begin to crack. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the heavy, breathless pause that occurs right before a storm changes the landscape forever. The silence in the street was absolute, a heavy vacuum that seemed to suck the sound from the surrounding city. Ma Jin-suk remained in his crouch, his expensive trousers pulling tight as he stayed eye level with the girl. Up close, he could see the tracks of dried salt on her cheeks, and the way her small chest heaved with the effort of staying upright. The $5 bill in her hand was a pathetic, rain-soaked scrap, yet she held it with the reverence of a soldier holding a flag. "The police," Jin-suk repeated, his voice a low vibration. "Why wouldn't they help you, Rowena?" The girl's lip trembled, and for a moment, the courage that had carried her through the wall of enforcers threatened to shatter. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a jagged whisper that barely reached his ears. "I went to the station near the market. I told them the men with the snakes on their necks took my mama from our kitchen. I told them they broke the door." She swallowed a sob, her eyes darting to the dark alleyway behind the sedan. But the man in the blue suit just laughed. "He told me my mama probably just went away to work off a debt. Then he called one of the men who took her. I saw his name on the phone. He told them I was there." Jin-suk's face remained a mask of stone, but internally, something shifted. He knew the precinct she was talking about. It was a place where the line between the law and the vultures had long since blurred. To the authorities, a woman from the slums was just another file to be lost. To the snakes, a gutter crew that had been sniffing around his borders, she was just a commodity. "They told me if I went back, or if I told anyone else, Mama wouldn't come home," she confessed, her voice cracking. She took a step closer, pressing the $5 bill into Jin-suk's gloved palm. "They said you're the only one everyone is afraid of. They said you're the king. Please, I don't have $20,000. I only have this. But if you save her, I'll work for you forever. I'll clean your shoes. I'll do anything." The enforcers behind him shifted uneasily, the cold metal of their weapons glinting in the neon light. They were waiting for the signal to discard her, to get back to the real business of the night. But Jin-suk didn't move. He looked down at the $5 bill. It was a joke of a payment, a sum that wouldn't cover the gas for his convoy to drive a single block. Yet, as he looked into Rowena's desperate, hopeful eyes, he realized that for the first time in 15 years, someone wasn't paying him out of greed or fear. She was paying him out of faith. He slowly closed his fingers around the bill, the paper crinkling in his grip. The dragon didn't take charity, and he certainly didn't take small change. But as he stood up, his height once again casting a long shadow over the street, he didn't hand the money back. "Keep your shoes, kid," Jin-suk said, his voice turning as cold as the coming winter. "And stay with the woman at the flower shop. Don't move until I come back." He turned to his lead enforcer, his eyes burning with a lethal, focused light. "Cancel the meeting with the dock masters. We're going to find the snakes. And we're going to show them what happens when they bring their filth into my streets." The interior of the black sedan was a stark contrast to the chaotic neon world outside. Silence reigned, broken only by the rhythmic click of Jin-suk's tablet as he scrolled through encrypted data. He sat in the back seat, the crumpled $5 bill resting on the leather upholstery beside him like a heavy weight. His lead enforcer, Minho, sat in the front, his eyes darting between the rearview mirror and his own phone as he coordinated with their scouts. "The snakes," Jin-suk said, his voice a low rasp that filled the cabin. "I want everything we have on them. Not the street-level rumors. I want their books, their hideouts, and their leadership." Minho nodded, his fingers flying across his screen. "They're a splinter group from the old Busan cruise, boss. Lowlives. They don't care about territory or tradition. They only care about high-yield turnover. They've been operating out of a series of condemned tenements on the edge of the shipyard. But it's not just drugs anymore. They've started a brokerage service. They find women with debts, real or manufactured, and move them through the port within 48 hours. Jin-suk's jaw tightened. He had built his empire on gambling, protection, and high-stakes logistics. But there were lines he never crossed. To him, the district was a living entity that needed to be fed and protected, not a carcass to be picked clean. The snakes were not just rivals. They were parasites. "Rowena said the police are calling them," Jin-suk noted, his eyes narrowing. "Which means they've bought the local precinct's silence. They think they're untouchable because they've paid off the men in blue." Minho pulled up a grainy surveillance photo of a man with a distinctive, jagged serpent tattoo winding up his neck, disappearing into his hairline. "That's their captain, Choi. He's the one who handles the collections. He's known for being thorough. If he took Rowena's mother, she's likely being held at the basement, an old cold storage facility they converted into a holding cell near the docks." Jin-suk looked out the window at the passing city. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the lights into long, jagged streaks of color. He thought of the girl, shivering in her pink dress, and the way she had spoken about the king everyone was afraid of. For years, he had been content with that fear. He had used it as a shield and a weapon. But tonight, that fear was the only thing standing between a child and a lifetime of grief. "Choi thinks he's playing a new game," Jin-suk said, his voice devoid of emotion but laced with a lethal promise. "He thinks the old rules don't apply to him. Tonight, we're going to teach him that the dragon still breathes fire. We don't just take their territory. We burn their business to the ground." The sedan pulled into the private garage beneath the Golden Dragon, the heavy steel door groaning shut behind them. Jin-suk didn't wait for his door to be opened. He stepped out, the $5 bill still gripped in his hand, and walked toward the elevator with a stride that made his seasoned guards struggle to keep pace. The air in the headquarters was usually thick with the hum of gambling tallies and logistics, but as the boss entered the war room, the atmosphere froze. "Everyone," Jin-suk said, his voice a low, dangerous velvet. "In here. Now." Within minutes, his inner circle had assembled. There was Kong, a former Special Forces operator who handled the heavy tactical work. Shin, the tech specialist who lived behind a wall of monitors, and a dozen of his most trusted enforcers. They expected a briefing on the dock union or a shipment of luxury cars. Instead, Jin-suk placed the crumpled $5 bill on the center of the mahogany table. This is our contract for the night, Jin Suk announced. A few men traded confused glances, but one look at Jin Suk's eyes, cold, focused, and burning with a rare, righteous fury, silenced any thought of a joke. The snakes have been kidnapping women in our district, Jin Suk continued, leaning over the table. They took a mother 3 days ago while her child watched from a closet. They've corrupted the local precinct to keep it quiet. They think because they are small, they are beneath our notice. They think because they are cruel, they are strong. He looked at Kong. I want a full tactical mobilization. No half measures. I want every SUV in the fleet on the road. I want the heavy gear out of the locker. Boss, Kong ventured cautiously. Hitting a human trafficking cell is high profile. It'll bring the kind of heat we usually avoid. Are we sure about the ROI on this? Jin Suk leaned in closer, his shadow stretching across the maps of the city. The return on investment is the integrity of my streets. If a 7-year-old girl can walk up to me with $5 because she believes I'm the only one brave enough to help, then I have to be that man. If we let this stand, we aren't a brotherhood. We're just another pack of vultures. Tonight, we aren't just protecting territory. We're reminding this city who owns the light and the dark. He turned to the monitors. Shin, track the cell signal Choi used to call the police station. Kong, gear up. We move in 20 minutes. If anyone stands between us and those women, don't ask for permission. Business is closed tonight. Tonight, we're going to war for a little girl's mother. The room erupted into a flurry of motion. There was no more questioning. The dragon had spoken, and for the first time in a decade, the mission wasn't about the money. It was personal. The heavy garage doors rolled up, exhaling a cloud of exhaust and cold air into the night. One by one, matte black SUVs slid out onto the rain-drenched streets of Gangnam, moving with the synchronized grace of a hunting pack. They didn't use sirens or flashing lights. Their authority was silent, expressed through tinted glass and the relentless momentum of high-performance engines. Ma Jin-suk sat in the lead vehicle, his silhouette framed by the passing blur of neon signs, electric pinks and jagged blues that streaked across his stoic face like war paint. Outside, the city was a smear of light and water. The rain hammered against the reinforced roof, a frantic percussion that matched the rising tension in the cabin. Inside, the only sounds were the low hum of the climate control and the occasional crackle of a radio earpiece. Jin-suk reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled $5 bill. He smoothed it against his thigh, the fragile paper a stark contrast to the cold steel of the handgun holstered at his side. This was no longer just a drive, it was a descent. As they left the polished district behind, the scenery began to decay. The towering glass skyscrapers gave way to low-slung concrete blocks, and the vibrant neon faded into the flickering orange of dying street lamps. They were entering the shipyard district, a labyrinth of rusted iron and shadows where the law was a ghost and the snakes felt most at home. The SUVs maintained a tight formation, cutting through deep puddles that sent plumes of gray water spraying into the dark. Jin-suk watched the docks materialize through the mist, a forest of towering cranes that looked like prehistoric beasts waiting in the fog. He knew that somewhere in this wasteland of shipping containers and salt air, Rowena's mother was counting the minutes in the dark. He felt a rare, sharp edge of anticipation. For years, he had moved through this city as a ghost, a man who dealt in the abstract math of power and profit. But tonight, he felt the weight of his own skin. He felt the cold steel of the dragon waking up. The convoy slowed as they approached a perimeter of chain-link fence topped with jagged coils of concertina wire. The lead SUV's headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a padlocked gate and a small guard shack where a man with a serpent tattoo on his neck was already standing up, his hand reaching for a radio. Jin-suk didn't wait for a report. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the gate. "Don't stop," he commanded, his voice as steady as the rain. "Drive through it." The driver shifted gears, the engine roared in protest, and the steel convoy lunged forward, ready to shatter the silence of the docks and the arrogance of the men who thought they could hide there. The impact of the lead SUV against the rusted iron gates was a dull, heavy thud that resonated through the salt-thickened air of the shipyard. Ma Jin-suk didn't flinch as the metal groan of the hinges gave way, the gates swinging open like the mouth of a tomb. The convoy didn't stop. It glided into the courtyard of the cold storage facility with the predatory grace of sharks in dark water. Before the vehicles had even fully come to a halt, the doors hissed open, and the elite enforcers poured out, not like street thugs, but like a shadow passing over the earth. The snake sentries never had a chance to raise an alarm. Kong moved first, a blur of dark tactical gear against the gray concrete. He intercepted the first guard near the loading dock, a man with a serpent tattoo who was only halfway through reaching for a radio. With a sharp, practiced efficiency, Kong neutralized him, the man's knees buckling before he could let out a breath. There was no gunfire, no shouting. There was only the rhythmic sound of rain hitting the pavement and the occasional soft thud of a body meeting the floor. Jin-suk stepped out of the car, the $5 bill safely tucked into his inner vest pocket, right over his heart. He walked through the center of the yard, flanked by his men who moved in a diamond formation. They were using high-frequency jammers to kill all cellular signals in the area, turning the warehouse into an island of silence. As they reached the main entrance, a heavy steel door reinforced with bars, Shin stepped forward with a specialized thermal lance. A brief, brilliant flare of white sparks cut through the gloom, a silent scream of melting iron, and then the door was kicked inward. Inside, the air was frigid, smelling of stagnant ice and old grease. The facility was a labyrinth of hanging plastic curtains and rusted meat hooks, illuminated by the sickly flicker of overhead fluorescent tubes. Jin-suk's enforcers fanned out, their suppressed weapons held in low-ready positions. They cleared the corners with surgical precision, moving past crates of contraband without a glance. They weren't here for the merchandise tonight. They were here for the human cost. In the back of the facility, past a heavy reinforced glass partition, they found the holding area. It was a series of converted freezer units, now lit with dim orange bulbs. Jin-suk felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He saw the silhouettes of figures huddled together on thin mattresses behind the iron bars. His men moved to the locks, the heavy clatter of keys finally breaking the suffocating quiet. As the first door swung open, Jin-suk stood at the threshold, his presence a towering shadow of dark charcoal and ink. He wasn't looking for an enemy yet. He was looking for a face that matched the desperation of a girl in a pink dress. He had dismantled the perimeter. Now, it was time to reclaim what had been stolen. The heavy plastic curtains hissed as Ma Jin-suk pushed through them, entering the elevated office that overlooked the warehouse floor. Inside, the air was thick with the cloying scent of cheap cigars and the sharp tang of unwashed adrenaline. Choi, the captain of the Snakes, was sprawled in a leather chair, laughing at a joke on his phone while his lieutenants counted stacks of dirty bills. The moment Jin-suk stepped into the light, the laughter died, replaced by a suffocating, terrified stillness. Choi scrambled to his feet, his hand hovering near the weapon on the desk, but the sight of Jin-suk's enforcers, silent, stone-faced, and already occupying every exit, made his fingers go limp. Jin-suk didn't reach for his gun. He walked slowly toward the desk, his presence filling the room like a rising tide. He looked at the ledgers, the discarded bottles, and the monitors showing the caged women below. "You're in the wrong neighborhood, Choi," Jin-suk said, his voice a low, vibrating hum that seemed to rattle the glass windows. "Boss Ma," Choi stammered, trying to find his swagger. "We didn't know this was yours. We thought, since you don't deal in this kind of trade, you wouldn't care. There's enough money for everyone. We can give you a cut." Jin-suk's eyes narrowed, the ink on his neck seeming to darken in the flickering light. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled $5 bill, smoothing it onto the desk over a stack of $100 notes. The contrast was staggering. A child's life savings resting on a bed of blood money. "You think I'm here for a cut?" Jin Suk asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that was far more terrifying than a shout. He leaned over the desk, his face inches from Choi's. "I spent 15 years making sure these streets had a code. We take from the greedy, and we fight the strong. But you bring filth into my garden. You target the ones who can't fight back. You made a 7-year-old girl cry because you were too lazy to earn an honest living." Choi opened his mouth to plead, but Jin Suk's hand shot out, gripping the man's throat with the strength of a vice. The dragon didn't just look angry, he looked repulsed. "The police you bought won't come for you. The brothers you trust are already face down in the rain. You traded your life for the price of a debt that never existed." Jin Suk leaned back, his expression returning to a mask of cold, professional detachment. He didn't need to do the work himself. He looked at Kong and gave a single, slight nod. "Take them to the docks," Jin Suk commanded, turning his back on the men who were now weeping for mercy. "And make sure the snakes are never seen in this city again. Business is over." He picked up the $5 bill, folded it carefully, and walked out of the office without looking back, leaving the filth behind to be swept away. The heavy iron gates of the cold storage facility remained open behind them, but the air began to change as the convoy moved away from the salt spray and rot of the docks. The jagged, aggressive neon of the industrial sector gave way to the softer, warmer glow of the residential neighborhood. Ma Jin-suk sat in the rear of the lead SUV, his posture rigid, but his eyes were fixed on the woman sitting across from him. Rosa Martinez looked as though she had been carved from exhaustion, her clothes tattered and her spirit frayed, yet she clutched a blanket provided by one of the enforcers as if it were a shield. She didn't ask where they were going. The presence of the man with the serpent tattoos on his neck should have terrified her, but the way he had looked at her in the warehouse, with a grim, protective fury, had silenced her fear. The SUV pulled to a halt in front of the small flower shop where Rowena had been told to wait. The shop was closed, but the golden light from the street lamps reflected off the glass, illuminating a small, slumped figure sitting on a wooden bench beneath the awning. At the sound of the engine, Rowena stood up, her pink dress a stark flash of color against the gray stone of the building. Her eyes were wide, searching the tinted windows of the vehicles with a desperate, heartbreaking hope. Jin-suk stepped out first. He didn't say a word as he reached back into the vehicle and offered a hand to Rosa. When the woman stepped onto the pavement, the world seemed to stop. Rowena let out a sound, half sob, half scream, and sprinted across the sidewalk. The reunion was a chaotic collision of tears and trembling limbs, a mother and daughter collapsing into each other's arms, as if trying to merge back into a single soul. The enforcers, men who had spent their lives witnessing the worst of humanity, turned their heads away, moved by a purity of emotion that had no place in their world. Jin-suk watched them for a long minute, his face a silent mask of stone. He felt the weight of the night settling in his bones, the adrenaline fading into a quiet, heavy satisfaction. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the crumpled $5 bill. It was dry now, though still scarred by the rain and the girl's desperate grip. He walked over to where they knelt on the concrete. Rowena looked up, her face a mask of tears and gratitude. Before she could speak, before she could offer him the lifetime of service she had promised, Jin-suk leaned down. He didn't hand the money back to her. He placed it gently in her small, dirty palm and closed her fingers over it. "The debt is paid. Rowena," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Your mother is home because you were brave enough to find me. Keep your money. You've already paid for a lifetime of protection in this district." He stood up, adjusted his cuffs, and turned back toward the shadows of his car. He was still the dragon, and there was still business to attend to, but as he looked back one last time, He knew that for the first time in 15 years, he wasn't just a man who ruled the streets. He was the man a little girl believed he could be. 10 years passed over the east side like a slow rolling tide, weathering the concrete and turning the neon signs into flickering relics of a younger city. Ma Jin-suk still sat in the back of the Golden Dragon, though the ink on his neck had faded slightly at the edges, and his charcoal suits now felt like a second skin he could never truly shed. He remained the undisputed dragon of the district, a man whose shadow governed the peace, but those close to him noticed a subtle shift in the gravity of his rule. He no longer led with the cold detachment of a machine. There was a protective weight to his authority, a quiet understanding that his power was a fence built around the vulnerable. In his private office, where the maps of his territory were pinned to the mahogany walls, there was a single item that defied the room's professional austerity. Framed in gold and positioned exactly at eye level was a piece of cheap construction paper, yellowed with time. It was a child's drawing of a man with large, protective hands standing under a bright, wax crayon sun. Beneath the stick figures, written in the careful, labored script of a 7-year-old, were the words, "To the brave king." It was the only contract Jin-suk had never closed. Every year, on the anniversary of the night, the snakes were purged from the docks. A small, unmarked envelope was hand-delivered to the restaurant's host. It never contained a letter of demand or a plea for a favor. Inside, there was always a single, crisp $5 bill and a short note, "For the next child who feels alone." Jin-suk sat at his desk, the latest $5 bill resting in his palm. He looked toward the window, watching the rain streak across the glass, the same rain that had once soaked a little girl in a pink dress. He knew that Rowena was a woman now, a teacher who walked the same streets she once feared, her head held high because she knew the dragon was watching. He had saved her mother that night, but as he looked at the drawing on his wall, Jin-suk finally accepted the truth he had carried for a decade. He hadn't just been a hitman or a boss that night. He had been the man she believed he could be. He stood up, tucked the $5 bill into a locked wooden box filled with its predecessors, and adjusted his cuffs. Outside, the district was waking up, a sprawling organism of light and shadow. Jin-suk stepped out of his office, his presence still commanding the silence of his men, but his eyes were no longer those of a predator looking for prey. He was the gardener of this district, and as long as he breathed, the weeds would never take root again. The dragon didn't just own the night. He guarded the hope of the morning.